I'd like to introduce our presenters this morning. So my name is Gail Parker. I'm the project manager for community grants, and I've been with SEMLEP on and off for about 10 years and very familiar with the programme and obviously the SEMLEP priorities, which we'll be going through in a bit more detail. Also this morning, we've got Lizzie Howe, a project officer for the community grants team, and she will be going through the paperwork in some detail a bit later on. We've also got Heidi Price, who is the person in charge of the money. So she'll be taking you through what the claims process looks like in a bit more detail. And Becky Thornton from Voluntary Impact Northamptonshire, who's going to be offering you support throughout the application process, and we'll talk you through some of the do's and don'ts for your applications over the coming weeks. Right, so if we kick off with a bit of background to the Community Grants programme and how that fits in with SEMLEP's strategic priorities. And this is an important part of the application. It comes in under section 8 of the application form. And it is important for you to really articulate how your project will fit in with the SEMLEP priorities, as many applications fail to maximise this section on their applications, and it does lose you points. So it's worth making some notes during this part of the session, and we will, as I say, circulate these slides afterwards to help you with that. So back in 2013, the South East Midlands area was given an allocation of European funding, and that was across both ERDF and ESF. And at the time, we were given around 80 million. At the time, the programme was supposed to finish in 2020, but as most of you probably know, this has gone on for an extra 3 years, so is now due to finish in March 23. The ESF part of the allocation really looked to support social inclusion throughout the SEMLEP area, in which individuals can fully participate and realise his or her potential. Our strategy supported specifically activity under priority 6 of our ESIF strategy, which again can be found on our website. So if you look at priority 6, which is tackling social and economic exclusion, this was really there to hopefully support real change within some of the more deprived areas of the South East Midlands communities. I would advise you to read that section of our website and include some of the references in section 8 of your application. So the funds under this area were specifically there to respond to the SEMLEP social inclusion strategy. So again, that can be found on our website. Would strongly advise you to reference that. And it's there to address the underlying causes of differences in employment levels and worklessness in some areas to particularly disadvantaged groups, which we'll go into in a bit more detail. And addressing the persistent pockets of need, ranging from the urban areas with multiple and complex deprivation to the more rural areas, which are more vulnerable to economic and demographic change. And particularly given COVID, these sections of society have unfortunately been hit the hardest. So as part of our economic recovery strategy, again, another one I would advise you to reference in the section 8. We've also got figures from the IMD scales, which can be found in our grants guidance. So we had a number of opt-ins under the ESF portion of our European funding, and one of those was from the Education and Skills Funding Agency, where the remit was to deliver skills training based on the LEP's local skills needs, which again, there is a strategy for, you'll be delighted to hear. So we've got a skills strategy on the website as well. which includes adult skills training for employability. And that's very much what the community grants is focused towards, both employability and moving into education. And the grants themselves are between £10,000 and £20,000. Now for that, we'd be looking for around 20 learners to go through as an average. And these grants specifically are not match funded, so you don't have to put any match in yourselves. And it's aimed at the voluntary and community sector. So you have to be either a charity or a CIC to access the funding. We are now, as I said earlier, delivering this through till March 2023. So any projects that you have to be absolutely completed before then, because as we have found through experience, the paperwork always takes a little while to conclude at the end. So my advice is that you really aim for a 6-month project, because the projects themselves won't start until April, because it has to go through a bit of a process now. So realistically, we're looking at an April start. So I would suggest that the projects really go somewhere between 6 and 9 months, just to give you the time to ensure that you get all of the paperwork done. And just a little bit of an interesting note on the geography, as this was let as a contract by Europe back in 2013. Our geography looked slightly different back then. And as you'll probably all be aware, there's been some more recent changes to local authorities, particularly in Northamptonshire. But the old geography includes Aylesbury and Cherwell, but excludes Wellingborough and East Northants. So projects can't be delivered in East Northants or Wellingborough, but can be delivered in Cherwell and Aylesbury. And it will need to be broken down by the districts of the old Northamptonshire. So those are on the map there. As I said earlier, we will be circulating these, so don't worry too much about taking notes. Right, so the other things that we talked about were the sort of types of projects that we're looking for. So let's talk in a bit more detail about what those really need to include. As I mentioned, we're really looking to work with the learners in the hardest to reach parts of society. And we'll talk on the next slide in a bit more detail about who they are. But the projects themselves are really about bringing those that are furthest from the workplace or from education closer. And that will be around developing things like self-esteem and confidence. Quite a lot of our projects include employability skills, so writing CVs, looking at their IT skills, some cases looking at their financial skills, but it's really working both on the sort of the person as well as their heading towards work skills. As I said earlier, we're particularly looking to help those that have been affected by COVID-19, but I think we also need to be mindful of the fact that we need to be able to deliver during COVID-19, and a lot of the projects suffered during the lockdowns, particularly as many of you were working with people in the communities and perhaps at community centres or in physical locations. That became very difficult when everything went into lockdown. So if you can give some thought as to when you're delivering, can it also be delivered digitally? And how are you going to do that? Again, I know it can be challenging, particularly if the participant groups that you're working with haven't got that access. So give some thought also how you're going to provide access to the learners and accessing things digitally. So my advice is to have a plan A, if you like. So this is what you ideally like to be doing if you are able to do things face to face. But what would happen if we had to go into a lockdown. And I think that's also true of your ability to resource the project as well. So given that the high rates of COVID, what if one or two of your key members of staff got COVID during delivery and were perhaps out of action for a little while as well? What's your backup plan then? So these are very much key things that we'd be looking for within the application. We've seen it affect quite a lot of our projects over the last couple of years. So it's something to really give some thought about when you're planning. And the thing we also ask you to plan is the administration of the project. We're not going to lie, there is an awful lot of paperwork involved in these projects. So make sure you've got a dedicated resource to making sure that the paperwork is done. And we'll talk in a lot more detail later on in the session about what that entails. But make no mistake, there is a lot of forms to fill in on this programme, so you will need to make sure you plan that in carefully. So the type of people that we're looking to help, as I said, those that are furthest from the job or education marketplace. We've got a list on there of the people that we'd be targeting. These can also be found in your grants guidance. The ones I've highlighted in yellow are those that we're actually particularly targeting at the moment, and that's due to them being most affected by COVID, and they're very much part of our economic recovery strategy to help those particular groups. Not that we want to look at applications from the other areas as well, but the highlighted ones are areas that we've identified as being the most in need, particularly following the COVID situation. So if you can prioritise those, great. If you can't, that's fine. We will still look at the project. And if there are a number of different target groups that you are looking for, then again, we'll look at those. And there's something probably highlight here as well. We've noticed a real turn down in the amount of referrals coming from the job centres, particularly those under 24, because the job centres have been told to use their own internal projects rather than going external. So again, think about where your referrals are coming from for your particular client group, because as I said, the job centres particularly have been very slow to pass people on. So what we'd be looking for in your applications is a real mixture of referral partners to ensure that you're getting that flow of learners onto your courses. That's been, again, a real issue through COVID, where a lot of the projects were relying on the job centres, for example, to pass some referrals. So have a good think again about your referral partners and make sure you reference those in your applications. So there'll be a few policies you'll need to have in place in order to run a community grants project. So the safeguarding policy is standard. We'd be looking for a data protection policy, which also covers off confidentiality. We'll also be looking for an equalities and diversities not only policy, but an implementation plan. So again, if you haven't got these or you would like a template for these, we do have all of these in place. So if you contact me afterwards, then I can send you a template for those. Also, your sustainability policy will need an implementation plan as well. So what we're looking for there, both of those cases, is actions that you'll specifically be doing in order to implement those two policies throughout the lifetime of the project. You'll also need a health and safety policy and an anti-bullying policy. But again, as I said earlier, we have templates of all of these. So if you don't have them in place, we can help you. So I'd like to give you a bit of an example of a couple of projects that have gone through the application process and have delivered successfully, particularly during lockdown. This first one is an organisation called BUDS, the Buckinghamshire Disability Service, particularly working with those with autism. They started out having a face-to-face delivery, and they unfortunately started, I think it was around the 1st of March 2020, and obviously about 23 days later we went into lockdown. So they very successfully pivoted from a face-to-face delivery to working online with their learners. And actually, as you can see here, one of the quotes from one of the participants, it really helped them achieve more personally than they thought possible and gave them a newfound confidence and skills. And actually the process of pivoting online helped with their online and IT skills as well. So just one example of a project that we've worked with recently. And another one that, again, started during lockdown. They were going to be face-to-face, as it shows in that photograph there. And they were working with the unemployed over 50s, and then pivoted again to delivering via Zoom. And as their learners were over 50, probably an area of the demographic that's traditionally not as IT literate, actually again made those that were participating appreciate and understand the digital world a lot better. So again, it's having that ability to be flexible in your approach. So in terms of what we'd be looking for as part of the project deliverables, we would be looking for you to enrol your learners and as part of the learner journey to provide an ILP or learner assessment and plan. And we'd be looking for around, if you're going for the maximum grant, we'd be looking for around 20 STO1s as part of your delivery. And of those 20, 17% will need to progress into paid employment. And again, making sure that you articulate within your application that pathway, how you're actually going to get 17% of your learners into paid employment. And then 14% to progress into education. And we'll go into a lot more detail later about what both of those look like in terms of evidencing them. And just to note, progression into volunteering is not an output under the Community Grants Project. It can be part of your learning. So volunteering can be part of the learning, but it isn't one of the outputs that we're looking for under this programme. So I've waffled on for quite a while. So has anybody got any questions at this stage? And if you have, if you could pop those into the chat. Okay, good. All right, I've obviously explained it all marvellously. So we'll move on now to Becky, who's going to take you through the eligibility.
Thanks, Gail. Some of this Gail has touched on, but I think it's really useful to have all the eligibility criteria in one place so you can see at a glance whether or not it's going to be right for your organisation. And this sort of checklist is also on the SEMLEP website, where you have to register an expression of interest as well. So it is on there and on here. So do please have a look properly through it before you think about applying and waste any time going any further if you're not eligible. So first of all, you need to support people in the South East Midlands, but as Gail has articulated, that's slightly different geography to how it stands at the moment. So do have a look in the guidance and at the map on the slides, just to make sure that your area is covered. Your organisation needs to have less than £300,000 annual income in your last year, and fewer than 50 full-time equivalent paid employees. You also need to show that you are completely autonomous from any organisation that is larger in either of those respects. So if, for example, you have a parent company, or you're a local branch of a charity that has national or regional presence, you need to show that you as an organisation are completely independent. You have your own finances, you have your own responsibility for those, and work separately from the larger organisation. Okay. You need to have a constitution of rules saying how your organisation is managed and what it does. You don't have to call it a constitution. There's lots of different names for it. It could be your memorandum of or your articles of association. It could be just your rules. But you need to have a sort of formally accepted document that shows who you are and what you do. And if you have any questions about any of these, you can always send them to me or ask the question, and just make sure that what you've got is what you need, because you do have to submit the your ruling document with your application. So it's better to make sure in the first instance that that's going to be okay. You need a UK bank account that the money can be paid into. There are a few insurances that you need to have in place, and I haven't double checked, but from memory it's £1 million minimum cover on each of those, and I can just see it now. It is. Again, this is all in the guidance. As we said, you do need to be legally constituted as a VCSE organisation, but we do interpret that quite broadly. So you don't have to be a registered charity. You could be a voluntary or community group, could be a charity, could be constituted group or club, or you could be a different kind of not-for-profit company or a CIC. As people may know, there's lots of different forms of governance that you can have as a VCSE organisation. And again, if you're in any doubt as to whether you tick that box, then please ask the question sooner rather than later, so that you know one way or another. As a sort of general rule, we can't fund individuals or sole traders. We can't fund companies that are set up for profit or are limited by shares, or those with fewer than 2 unrelated board or committee members. This is all in the guidance, so do have a double check there first, but do come back to us if you have any doubt, as I say, because I know that there's so many different structures that people might have. Sometimes you're not quite sure where you fit, or if you fit neatly into one of these boxes. So better to let us know straight away, and we can sort that for you. Okay.
Thanks, Becky. So just quickly, we'll go through the process for actually applying. As Becky says, check your eligibility, and then submit your expression of interest. The website address is there at the top of that slide. There's a form on the site which asks you a few questions, and you'll then go through onto our system. And this also applies for anybody that is applying for an extension or additional applications. And as Becky has said, talk to her. She's there to give advice and guidance. So if you're unsure of anything, then do talk to her. You'll get an automated email when you do express an interest with Becky's contact details on. And you'll also get a copy of the guidance and also a draft Word version of the application. So you can also start to draft out your responses. And you will also get a link to the full application form as you express the interest. And that date's completely wrong on there. So the date that we are submitting by, I think, is the 2nd of February at 12 noon. So it's very important that you give yourself plenty of time to submit your application. Lots of people have had IT issues at the last minute, so don't leave it till 5 minutes to 12 to submit. Make sure you do it in plenty of time. And we'll talk a little bit more about if you do want Becky to help you with your application when you need to get that to her by. So back to you, Becky.
Okay, excuse me. So just to talk about the application, the kinds of things to expect in there. So you will need to answer a number of due diligence questions. A lot of these are yes or no questions, but they are a sort of pass or fail on a lot of occasions. So you need to make sure that you read those carefully and answer them to the best of your ability. Again, if you have any questions about them, let us know. They are relatively straightforward, but you do need to go through and just check that you're giving the right information. Gail has talked about SEMLEP priorities earlier on, and I'll just re-emphasise really what she said earlier, in that sometimes this is a question that people gloss over a little bit or put a fairly generic answer. Whereas obviously if you can really directly relate the work that you're doing and the people that you're doing it with to the priorities that can be found on the guidance and on the website, then that's really going to put you in a much stronger position if you can show really how your work will support the overall aims and objectives of SEMLEP and of the grant programme. You need to demonstrate how your work will help participants to progress. I mean, that sounds a little bit silly really, but it sounds a bit obvious, but it's actually, again, around really explaining what you're doing and how that's going to support people and get them closer to employment. I think it's sometimes very easy to make an assumption because you know that the work that you're doing works, you know what you want to do and why, but don't assume that the people reading your application will have any prior knowledge or will know that. So do try and spell it out. And that goes for the participant journey as well. So Gail's mentioned about referrers. So, you know, think about their journey right from being referred to you from another organisation, the soft outcomes they're going to gain along the way, and where they're going to end up hopefully at the end of it. There's also a question around staff delivering the project, and obviously there's space for you to put in your budget and projected costs. Okay. Have the next slide. Thank you. So just some reminders really. Don't forget to think carefully about the work that you're planning and how it relates. As I say, it's very easy to come up with a great idea or try and sort of shoehorn work that you already do into something that there's funding for. We've all been there a little bit, I think, but really have a, you know, sensible look at what you're trying to do and how it fits and how it's going to help with this. Use the link you'll be sent to return to your application as necessary. So you can save your application on the portal, on the link, whilst you're doing it. But as Gail said, there is a Word document that you will be sent to plan your drafts on, and it's a much easier document to actually have as your working document while you're sort of shaping up your application and getting it ready. It's also really the only way that I can give feedback on your application is by sending me the Word document. I won't have access to the things that you've been entering onto the portal until well after they've been submitted. So use the Word document. It mirrors the questions on the online application completely. So do use that to sort of shape it up and get it as good as possible before you can do it. And it also then makes it easier when you do come to use the link and submit, because you should be able to sort of copy and paste quite a lot of your content into the portal. Look at your eligible costs and plan your budget realistically. It is, there are limits on the grants. It's between 10 and 20,000, as Gail said. So make sure that you're looking within that. And again, just to reiterate, do make sure that you are realistic about staff time, particularly including admin time and that kind of thing, and make sure that you have the funds available to cover that. Make sure you're answering the question being asked. Look out for any word limits. These are on the Word document, I think, as well as on the portal, so you are able to take that into account. On the portal, things would just be cut off if they go over the word limit, so you do need to be really conscious of what you're doing. There is also a list of documents that you need to attach at this stage, at application stage. That list is in the guidance. It's on the Word form, I think, and it's certainly on the online application link. So please do have a look through and make sure that you add everything. We can help you determine which documents you need to submit with your applications, it says on here. And if you have any queries about your documents, again, you can always send them across and we'll have a look at those before you get to submission stage. So other things that we can do in terms of support, we can talk about your potential project ideas and make sure that not only are you eligible as an organisation, but the idea that you've got for your project is eligible and fits with the criteria. We can answer any questions, obviously, throughout the process which are not covered in the guidance, but I would really strongly urge you to look at the guidance first, because there is quite a lot of information in there. It's a really good and supportive document, so please read the guidance first. But if anything is still unclear or you're unsure about, or you want to know how it fits with your particular individual circumstances, then please ask the questions. As I say, would far rather that you ask the questions at an early stage rather than spend a lot of time on the application if it's not going to be right for you, or if if we could have just steered you slightly differently to make it work. SEMLEP essentially want to give all this money away, so we want applications to be as strong as they possibly can, and we can give feedback on drafts of your application, but there is a set date really when I would need applications through if you want to get feedback in time to submit, and that's I think the Friday before, which is the 28th of January. So if you do want to send a draft across for me to have a look at, then I do need it by close of play on the Friday, which gives me a day or two the following week to get it back to you before you have to submit on Wednesday, the 2nd of Feb. Obviously, you can tell that those timings are fairly tight, so the sooner the better, really. If you do want full feedback, the earlier you can get across, the better, because that gives us time for sort of a bit of backwards and forwards if needs be. And you're also welcome to send across sort of chunks. So if there are a couple of questions that you just aren't quite sure about and you want to send me what you've got so far, then again, we'd welcome that, and you can send it across at any time. Okay.
Thanks, Becky. We've got one question that's come up, which is, can I please check if there is a minimum income threshold for eligibility? Our charity has been fairly dormant for a few years, so recent accounts show very little activity. Would that exclude us?
I think the only thing I would say on that is there isn't actually technically a minimum level, is there? But you do need to be really conscious of your cash flow, which I think Heidi probably, or is it Heidi or Lizzie will be talking about later, because some of the claims are made in arrears, aren't they? So people do need to be conscious of having enough money to finance the project until they get the next tranche of the funds, but I know that that's going to be talked about later as well.
Yes, so we don't have a minimum, so that wouldn't exclude you, but as Becky says, you just need to be able to cash flow the first few months. Next question is, can applications be made as a consortium or a group of different parties? Now, I may be wrong, but I thought the answer was no to that. However, you can bring people in to deliver some of the aspects of your project. Yes, so that's right. There'd need to be a lead applicant, but if you are using people for different aspects of delivery, that's fine. You can subcontract it out, but obviously that will just need to be made clear in your budgeting. And we would need invoices from the third parties to evidence any payments that we made back to you that you've made to them. So unfortunately, not as a consortium, but you can have delivery partners on the project. So the next question is, can different parties apply individually for complementary projects? Which again, that's not sort of the nature of the grant. It's really to fund individual projects. Obviously, we absolutely support collaboration. The difficulty being if one applicant, one learner has been on a community grants project, they can't then be funded again on another community grants project. So it's something to bear in mind there. Right, I'll put the next slide up.
I'm not going to go through all of these, but we've just got a few slides with some common mistakes and top tips. These are often about funding applications generally, really, but with some relevance to this one in particular. And these, again, will all be on the slides that you can look at afterwards. So it's really just around this one is some very common mistakes that can be made. So missing information, missing answers, not giving enough information. As I said before, don't take anything for granted. Do spell out what you're trying to say to us. It is helpful. And also the questions are scored separately as well. So do bear that in mind, that just because you've written something in one question, you may need to sort of mention it again in another one if it's relevant to the answer to that question as well. So read the question, make sure you're answering actually what's being asked, rather than just the story that you want to tell. It's useful in this application actually because it's very clearly shown the score that will be given to each of the questions. So you'll see the weighting between questions. So for example, if a question, and there are a couple, is worth 30% of your overall score, then you can sort of tell from that giving 3 or 4 sentences is not really going to be sufficient to get you a good score in that section. So pay attention to the weighting of the scored questions, and that gives you some kind of idea of the level of detail and information that people would be looking for in your response to that question. So you need to make sure that you can show evidence of need, show why you've picked those particular people to work with, for example, and why you think that they really would benefit from the work that you're planning to do. Make sure that you've got enough management and procedures and that you've planned your project out. And then the final bit on there is again around the sort of finances and the processes. Make sure that we're left confident really about your ability to manage the funds and the finances of the project going forward. Again, just being very clear about what you're going to do and that you've got enough staff to do it. As Gail said, particularly in these times, I didn't think we'd still be saying this 2 years later, but we clearly are, that you know, it's very clear that we are still going to have to be coping with staff absences one way or another for some time. So bear that in mind, and as Gail was saying, have a bit of a plan B and make sure we know what that is. So again, just to give the panel real confidence in your ability to sort of continue with the project. Monitoring and evaluation, you need to be very clear about how you will show the progress of learners, show what they've got from their work with you, and how you're going to record that and how you're going to report on that, and how you feel that the progressions will be achieved, and how you'll be able to demonstrate that very clearly as well. And again, a lot of these we've sort of talked about already, but it is worth just reminding yourself of some of these things. Read the guidance, read the priorities, make sure that this really is the right thing for you. Don't try and squeeze it in if it just won't fit. It's not worth your time because it will be obvious, and you won't be successful. So, you know, look at it objectively and see what you think. Be realistic about what you want to do and why, plan it out, complete everything you need to, submit everything you need to, and again, make sure that you've got enough time to do it. As Gail said, it's brilliant having an online portal, but unfortunately that does mean that we are relying on technology a little bit, and we all know the pros and cons around that. So as Gail said, please don't leave it to 10 to 12 to start to start uploading things, because you're just not going to get there, and the system does shut off at midday. So if you're halfway through, you know, it's an automatic shutdown, so we can't really make exceptions on that one. So please give yourself enough time to do it. And then finally at the bottom there, as I say, we're really fortunate on this programme to have capacity to give support during the application process. So please take advantage of it. I'm here to answer any questions. You will get my contact details, and I'm always happy to answer any questions by email, or we can plan a call if that helps. So please bear that in mind and use all the information that you've got, and hopefully make it as strong an application as you can.
Thanks, Becky. So what happens to the application once you've made it? So after the cut-off point at midday on the 2nd of February, all of the applications are then sent to Becky, and she will just go through the first part, the questions 1 to 6, where she's looking for the sort of due diligence part of the application. So, are you set up right? Are your finances okay? Have you got the right insurances in place? Is the experience right that you've had previously? So just doing a bit of due diligence on that first 6 sections of your application. And there is, as she said earlier, a pass or fail element to that. So we will notify you at the end of stage 1 whether you have made it through to the next stage. We might at that point ask for a little bit more information if there's something missing. But generally it is a pass or fail at that stage. You then go to the stage 2 of the process, and that is the officer panel, which is basically made up of 3 officers within SEMLEP who individually will assess the second half of the application. So that's section 7 down to 12. So really digging into the meat, if you like, of your application and the project that you are proposing to deliver. And those sections will be aggregated over the 3 officers. And if you make a certain threshold, which is the magic number 6, then you'll automatically be put through to the next stage, which is the final stage of the grant panel assessment. Again, we might come back to you after the officer scoring phase to ask for a bit more information or clarification on some of the points, so that by the time it gets to grant panel, we have a full set of papers and that you have answered any queries that the officers had, and then the grant panel can make a final decision. So again, at the officer scoring panel stage, there is a pass or fail. Generally, the panel does ask to see some of those that fall below the 6 mark if there's some merit in the application. So we tend to put through a few more than just those that make over 6. But if you're any less than 5, you definitely won't make it through, and you will be told at that stage that unfortunately it would be a fail. When it reaches the grant panel stage, and as I said earlier, this process takes a while, so the actual grant panels are meeting in March. So final decisions will then be made sort of towards, I think it's the 3rd week in March. And we will either at that stage reject the application. It might be approved, but with conditions. So there might still be some queries from the grant panel that need answering before you can go ahead, or it will be approved outright and you can get on with delivery. And we will notify you at that stage as to whether you've been one of those 3 categories. So as I said earlier, it's best to plan your delivery to start from around the 1st of April. We'll be asking you within the application to set out your milestones. If you can make sure in your milestones that you account for the fact that you'll be starting delivery in early April, and then plan for the project to be delivered over the next 6 to 9 months within your milestones. And in your milestones, clearly articulate if you're doing it in cohorts, when cohort 1 will start and when cohort 2 will start, and make it very clear in those milestones how your delivery will progress over those 6 to 9 months. So if you're then lucky enough to have been approved by the grant panel, you will then be contacted by one of the project officers and we'll set up an induction meeting. We will go through in that induction meeting, if there is any kind of conditions attached to the approval, we'll talk through those with you. We will go through the paperwork in some great detail during that meeting as well to help you understand what you'll need to be filling out. So it's very important at that inception meeting, you have not only the project manager, but anybody that's going to be responsible for the administration of the project as you go along. We'll then be asking you to fill in a monthly report, which will be submitted to your project officer. We also put on quarterly forums for all of the providers, a chance to share best practice, hear from some of the other providers' projects, so you can understand what other projects are being delivered, and then also to answer any questions that have arisen during your delivery so far. And we've talked about claims, which we will go through in a bit more detail, but you'll need to submit claims either in 3 or 4 tranches. So you get your first claim paid at the start, and that's you don't have to provide any evidence for the first amount of money. We'll pay 25% of the overall grant to get you started. But your second claim will need to be made once you've got some learners through the process, and you'll need to upload your paperwork to demonstrate that. And you'll also need to provide evidence not only for your second claim, but for the first claim as well. So the second claim, there's a lot of paperwork to be submitted. So again, with your planning, make sure that you've planned that into your project plan. Okay, so any questions at all at this stage? Great, okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Lizzie, who's going to talk through the evidence requirements. Over to you.
Thanks, Gail. Morning, everybody. So just to kind of recap what Gail was talking about there, there's a lot of paperwork involved in these programs, and we are a relatively small team. So in order to kind of make sure that the projects run timely and according to your milestones and within your contract period, there really needs to be somebody on your team that is responsible for getting that paperwork filled in and uploaded, because that allows us to kind of check over, as your program's progressing, to check over your eligibility for all of your participants and make sure sort of everything is up to date. Failure to get the paperwork uploaded in a timely manner will delay your claims being paid, and it might also put you out of contract at the end of the programme. So it is really important that you do stay on top of the paperwork. So in terms of the participant eligibility, to be eligible for the support from the ESF, the individual must be able to legally reside in the UK and able to take paid employment. It's expected that the ESF support for unemployed people will be used to move individuals into work or closer to employment by providing vocational training, information, advice, and guidance. Thank you. So evidence of eligibility, so proof has to be obtained to evidence that the participant is able to reside and work in the UK during the period of the ESF support. So that can be a birth certificate, it can be a passport, visa, etc. So when we're looking at getting passports, we need to be able to see, for example, the passport, where it was issued and the date of expiry of the passport as well. Same with things like birth certificates, we need to see the country of issue. The participant has to be unemployed or economically inactive anyone that's in full-time education is not eligible, and anybody that is working part-time, even if it's just 4 hours a week, for example, is not eligible. They must be completely unemployed or inactive. And the project's eligibility criteria has to be met. So that's the entry conditions that the individuals have to qualify for support. So that's kind of in your application, the sort of target audience that you are looking to reach. So as we've said, there's a lot of paperwork involved. Typically that is your enrolment forms, otherwise known as the SEG 20. So that is the point where we are checking that the person that you've enrolled onto your programme is eligible. So that's where we'll see the evidence that they can live and work in the UK. That's quite a lengthy form. So the only advice I can give you on that is make sure every box is filled in, every tick box is selected, and everything is signed and dated, because otherwise that will basically throw the whole document out. So it's just paying attention to that enrolment form and making sure that they are definitely eligible for the programme, and also within the delivery location as well. Has to be obviously within the SEMLEP area. You may end up having referral forms if participants are referred from another agency, like the Job Centre, for example. There will be individual learning plans. So that's where you're setting your outcomes for each individual, what they're hoping to achieve by being on your programme. Could be a soft outcome, could be a hard outcome, and sort of trying to get a grasp of where your participant wants to be at the end of the programme. Timesheets. So once you've got them enrolled and the programme has started, you'll have to fill out a timesheet for all of the time that the participant spent on the programme. So it's always handy to kind of have a little overview as to what each sort of entry is. So if you spent 2 hours doing CV writing, just pop that in, that's what it is, and make sure that the participant signs every entry to say that they are happy that they were there that day. At the end of the programme, they will fill out an exit form, which is basically an overview of how they found the programme, and that they're confirming their start and end date of when they last had contact with you. And at the very end, if they are one of your outputs and they do end up going into employment or education, they'll fill out a progression form, which essentially highlights what it is they've gone on to do. For example, if it's say education outcome, what course they've gone on to, what the learning hours are, what level the course is. So that'll be filled out for all of your outputs. Just to kind of touch on the learning plan, that is a live document. So that will be continually updated throughout your programme. So obviously you may set out that your participant's going to do 20 hours, they may end up doing 40 hours, which will obviously then alter your learning plan. So that has to be updated as and when things start changing on the programme. If your participant ends up going into a progression, so secures a job or a college course or university course, whatever it is they go on to do, it has to be within 28 days. So if they finish with you on the 1st of the month, they have to have started that new job or that new education by the 28th, for example. If it's sort of a situation where there's like a whole month has passed or a month and a half before they end up starting that job, maybe think about whether or not you can stay in contact with that participant, whether there's any further support you can give them. If so, continue logging it on your timesheet, and that will obviously then close the gap between the dates, which will then make them eligible. So definitely try and keep in contact with them over that period. If they become a PGA1, so they go on to paid employment at the end of your programme, we do require evidence to support that. So in order of preference, that can be letter on letterheaded paper with a company stamp on confirming the participants' details, whether they're full or part-time work, what date they start and what time they do, what hours they're contracted. An email from the employer showing the participants' details and who the employer is with all of the previous details, so start date, hours contracted, or a contract of employment. We don't accept offer letters because that kind of doesn't show that they have started the job. So we need to see that sort of level of evidence, and preferably as well, an email from the employer to confirm they have actually begun working there. If they're self-employed, we want to see a letter from HMRC evidencing the registration, or a bank statement for their business account or their registration with Companies House.
Okay, we've just had a quick question, Lizzie. So somebody's asked, if delivery is online, how do we get a signature? As part of the COVID easing of restrictions, they have now said, as long as we get an email back from the participant, and it has to include their forms on it. So take a screenshot of the email with the forms attached, and on it, if the applicant can just confirm that these are correct and that they have done what it says in the forms. So in light of digital delivery, we don't need to see wet signatures for everything, but we do need to see an email from the learner to you, preferably with the forms attached, saying that that is correct. So that will get around the digital delivery side of things. Back to you.
Thank you. If your participant ends up being a PGO3 outcome, so they go on to education, we need a copy of their enrolment or registration form. If applicable, you can get a copy of the college ILR or a signed letter of confirmation of enrolment from the provider. So that has to show participant's name, the course title, what level the course is, and the guided learning hours. If the course is at the same level as the one you're running, it has to be 20 hours or more. And again, like with the employment, it has to show that they have started, not that they're going to start, but that they have actually started. So a lot of the time our projects will contact the provider and they'll have an email that comes back and say, you know, I can confirm that so-and-so has enrolled on this course, they have been attending. It just kind of covers the fact that they have, you know, begun.
Yeah, it's also worth saying, if they're going on to a digital course, again, if you can take a screenshot of that digital course that shows the guided learning hours within the screenshot, that also is fine. It has to have the name of the participant as well, but we've had quite a lot of people going on to do online courses after they finished. Again, it just needs to show that information as well.
So in terms of publicity, all materials relating to the project have to show the ESF logo. You must have a ESF poster displayed at your delivery locations, and it has to be a minimum of A3 size. If you're doing virtual training, then you need to have a poster behind you, or you can put a virtual background on that shows the ESF logo and just take a screenshot of that for us for that evidence. All of the participants that you enrol have to be informed about the support of the ESF. In the enrolment form, actually at the end, there's a declaration that the participant has to tick and sign. And part of that is explaining that the ESF is funding the programme and that the participant is aware of that. And if you have a website, again, just make sure that has got the ESF logo on there visible.
Okay, we've got another question. If we have 20 learners and 17% need to progress into paid employment, i.e. 3 people, does this mean we need to provide evidence of progression for only the 3 people or all 20? So yes, it will just be the 3 people that need to be shown as progressions. So progressions are only those that go on to something else. You will need to, the evidence for the 20 learners will be through the individual learning plans. So that's enough evidence for the learners. But if they progress, then yes, you will need to provide evidence for just those.
So that's just an example of what your poster may look like, your project name, what it is your project's delivering, that it is part funded by the ESF, and then the lovely little logo on there at the bottom. So a copy of all promotional materials and certified copies of participants' paperwork must be returned, not necessarily by post. A lot of the time we will collect the paperwork from you at the end of the programme, because we do need to have the hard copies back. So we can arrange a swap over of that paperwork. It doesn't need to be posted now, but what we ask you to do is, with the paperwork, to scan it onto a shared drive. So we will have electronic copies of that as well. And in relation to your promotional materials like your poster, we either need to see a copy of that on the SharePoint or a photograph of that or a screenshot, whichever way you're delivering the programme. We just need to have a copy of that onto the SharePoint as well.
Great, thanks, Lizzie. So any more questions at this stage? So the first question, if publicity is mainly online, do you need hard copies? No, that's fine. We'll take a screenshot if it's a Zoom. That's fine. And the next question is, what are the repercussions of 0% people progressing? The project is designed so that people do progress. We are looking for that as part of your delivery. So we would need to review the amount of grant that you receive if you were unable to deliver that through the lifetime of the project. So we have review points each month. As I say, we look at your monthly reports. So we will, if you're not delivering what you said you were going to deliver, then it would be a review of the amount of money that you receive. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the claims process and handing over to Heidi. Over to you, Heidi.
Okay, thank you very much. Morning, everybody. Right, the claims. This is like a 4-page spreadsheet in a sense. The two that's important are the SCG 11A and B. Your first claim to SEMLEP will consist of your invoice with a description, including your bank account details, the name of the person that's going to be dealing with the claims, and obviously the project name. This invoice is for 25% of the services that you're going to deliver for SEMLEP, and it's 25% of your grant total. So if you get the full amount of 20,000, obviously your first invoice is going to be for 5,000. This is paid in advance. This is to help you to set up with any printing, paperwork, things that you need, that you might have to, get done, even towards a bit of rent. And this is paid in advance, which is great. But please keep all your invoices, any of your receipts, anything like that, because this amount of money is evidenced in your second claim. And your second claim comes once the project started, as I think Gail mentioned earlier on. And you've got people actually signed up for the programme. The SCG 20s are completed, because when you send in your second claim, we also need you to upload this paperwork. Without the paperwork, there won't be a claim. Right, how do we sort this out? This is the front cover of the SCG 11A. And as you can see, it's got the company name, project names, the reference number, which you will get once the contract is signed. We will give you the reference number of your project. And as you can see, on this one, it says claim number 2. So this is evidencing your 25% and your second claim. And just down below, you can see we just need basically your invoice name, whatever your project's called. In here, it's Evolving Workforce, the invoice number. All we need in the description line is that the costs are related to the STO1s, PGO1s and PGO3s. We don't need a list of all the items. This comes on the next page. One thing I would like to say, where it says total grant awarded, this is the amount as per your contract. Here, for easiness sake, it says 20,000. If your contract's 18,000, then please put 18,000 in there. Your 25%, sorry, Gail. your 25% goes below. And these orange cells will formulate themselves. So please don't alter anything in there, just put in the figures. We can go to the next one now, Gail. This is the SCG 11B, which is the second page, and this is where you itemize all your claims. As you can see, item 1, it could be marketing, Vistaprint, the total amount. And to make it easier for you, if you put claim 1 on the right-hand side, then you know that you've got all your receipts and everything from claim 1. And below it, you can add on the claim 2, which would make the total of your claim 2 claim. It sounds a bit ridiculous. And what we do, if your claim 2 totals £10,000, you've already had 5,000. So when I go to the 11A, I will put in that 5,000 below as claim 2. Because you've already had, it sounds complicated, but you've already had 5,000. You're evidencing 5,000, plus you're claiming 5,000, which makes your 11B say 10,000, but on the front, I will be saying 5,000. It will all, when we go through the induction, we'll go through it in more detail, and it'll be a lot more easier for you to understand. If we can go down to the next one, girl. Receipts. You're likely to get, you know, train tickets, travel, bus tickets, maybe even taxi receipts from some of the participants. I don't want all those sending in. If you could just scan those in, put 4 or 5 onto an A4 piece of paper and scan in, and you can date and sign each one. And what I'd like you to do when you fill in the 11B is to allocate a number to the scanned receipt or invoice, link it to the entry on the 11B, like item 1, item 2, item 3, so that I can match them up. And these must be certified stamped copies. If you need more room on the 11B, you can add extra rows. There's not a problem with that at all. So when you're filling it in, the expenditures claim, you can scan the original invoices and receipts to SEMLEP. They will follow the item number on the SCG 11B as per your, that's your spreadsheet. Please keep a hold of all these because at the end of the project, we are likely to need them for the ESF. Originally, they wanted all the original documents, receipts and things. At the moment, we're not sure what will happen going forward because of the pandemic and, you know, everybody being in lockdown, but we will keep hold of the originals. Bank statements I will need from you showing all defrail, and these must be submitted along with the signed timesheets, any pay slips where necessary, trainers' hourly pay to the project, their invoices, any receipts. The bank details you can redact, obviously. We only need to see what's coming out to pay staff, tutors, whatever. So please don't worry, we're quite happy for you to redact them and just scan them in. Once you've got your contract, we will be sending you a link up to our SharePoint where you will be able to upload all this evidence. And as I said earlier, when you're sending in your claim to expenditure evidence, we will need your participant signed enrolment forms before any monies can be released. So you do need to get on top of that.
Great, thank you very much, Heidi. So that's finished our information webinar this morning. We hope you found it useful. There is a lot of information on our website, and obviously you can contact any of us with questions, particularly Becky in the first instance. I'd like to thank all of our presenters this morning, Becky, Lizzie and Heidi, and we look forward to receiving your applications. Thank you very much, everybody.